Alright, now let's get to the coloring. So I erased everything using my kneaded eraser, and as you can see, it looks pretty clean, because we did it lightly, that it, didn't make a whole mess. So of course there's areas that still need a little bit more erasing, but that can always be done later. Now when it comes to colored pencils and everything, you can't really erase that very much unless it's a special case, like maybe if it's like really flaky. But anyways, let's get started off with our skin. So I always like starting with the skin because, it gives a lot of life at first. So I'm going to be taking my white. So I actually found my white. I actually realized I had a third tray in here. So that's going to be fun to experiment with. Anyway, so let's go ahead and just color the base of the skin with some white. And that's just going to give a nice base for the colors to pop out. So once again, color pencils are all about layering. So I like, using Prismacolors on tone paper because the tone paper already has a bit of grit to it and therefore can hold the Prismacolors pretty well. Whereas when it comes to like a sketchbook paper, for example, it's a little bit harder because the grain is so smooth and therefore it doesn't blend as well. But when it comes to tone paper like this, it looks really, really nice. Now, of course, if you don't have tone paper, don't worry about it because this is just optional. So I'm going to color a soft layer using white. I'm not going to make it too out there, but just enough. Now let's go ahead and use our light peach. This is my 72 set, by the way. And I'm just going to color on top. And because we already added the white on top, it looks a lot more, feels a lot more, how do you say it, just shows color more. So I'm just going to lightly color on top. Not going to put too much pressure, but just enough that, the color can show. Because I'll be adding some darker colors later on, and I don't want that to disturb it with lighter colors. But just continue on. So kind of, if you want, you can even go in a circular motion. That would probably be even better because it'll give less white space. And of course with tone paper you can't really get away from that. You have to just deal with the graininess sometimes. Okay, so once we have that done, it looks pretty white right now, but we will go a little bit darker now. So let's go ahead and take, let me see here. Let's take a beige here. I'm just going to zoom in real quick. And I'm just going to be coloring on top. So this kind of gives a more yellowish tone. And this will also kind of give it more of a tan look, which I would actually prefer. So yes, we did use the peach as a base, but it's just for layering in the colors. So color pencils, you always have to layer. If you don't, then it'll look very, very dry and just not very interesting looking. So put a little bit of pressure this time, just because I want the color to show through. Looking good. Now we are going to use a burnt ochre or any other kind of brown that you have that's kind of lighter in color. In fact, let me go ahead and take my sienna and just go ahead and color on top. Actually, that's a little bit too dark. So I'm going to use my burnt ochre and color really lightly on top, and so make sure that kind of blends nicely. So look at that. Just by adding a little bit of pressure, it already shows really, really nicely. So just keep on with that pressure. Just make it pretty light so it doesn't overwhelm your whole image. So I would always go very light first and then dark later. So I always like using the side of the pencil as well, because that gives a not as scratchy of a look. It gives it just gives a more smoother look as well. So as you can see, the burnt sienna works really well when it comes to adding more of this color. In fact, on my camera, it looks a little bit washed out. In real life, you might actually just want to stop at this point because it actually looks less pale this way, unless I move my lighting a little bit differently. Yeah, I think this looks good. But my camera looks a little bit different than it is on the paper, so yeah. So far, so good. Now I'm going to take the same burnt ochre. Actually, I'm going to take my burnt sienna brown, and I'm just going to be marking in my shadows now underneath the hairline, underneath the crown. So I'm just adding shadows underneath just to give it some nice form. So I'm pressing pretty hard just because I want that to be a strong cast shadow. And I also want a cast shadow underneath, close to the eyelids as well. In fact, it's better to kind of put a little bit of shadow underneath here just to kind of give that more hollow look, or that more serious look. And shade the inside of the ear as well. So you don't have to use the side of the pencil as much in this case because this is actually a little bit more detailed. So you can use the tip of the pencil in this case. I'm also adding a little bit of shading around the creases of his brow. I'm also adding a little bit of shadow from the back of his nose. This is assuming that we're doing a more of a frontal lighting. I always like to also add a bit of a cast shadow on the neck as well because the head is kind of leaning over. I'm going to add some lighting to the sternocleidomastoid and then the neck. So far so good. You know, we have our light and then we have our dark. Now let's add a little bit more saturation. So what I'm going to do in this one here is I'm going to take a bit of my sand color and just kind of color in a nice kind of yellowish tone. That's just to give it a little bit of a tanner look, rather than super pale and peachy. So I'm just going to be replacing the lighter tone with a sand color. So it looks a little bit different now. Let's zoom out. So far, so good. And just for a little bit of good measure, I'm going to add a little bit of a peach. So this is just kind of a slightly darker tone. I'm just going to use this to blend all the shadows in because it's kind of like a reddish tone here. So I'm going to add that in and blend it. So I like using light colors on top of dark colors to blend in my colors here because it just kind of gives it that nice body to it. I'm going to take this burnt ochre again and just redefine my shadows. In fact, I'm going to take a darker brown. I'm going to take a dark brown here. Let's see how dark this is. Yeah, that's good enough. And I'm just going to color in the deep, deep dark shadows so it pops out. So areas that are kind of deeper, kind of more inner, you know, such as around the corners of the eyes, would need this dark brown. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to shade in the lower part of his head a little bit darker, just to kind of give that like nice ombre look, or that nice gradation. I'm also going to shade a little bit around his jawline, just to kind of show that he's a little bit more chiseled now. So it kind of gives that nice, like, nice shape. I'm also going to add a little bit of shadow underneath his mouth as well. Not as like lip gloss, but just kind of like a tint. I'm also going to add a little bit of tint underneath his eyes as well, just to kind of liven it up. There. So that is good for the skin. Now let's go ahead and work on a little bit of the eyes, and we're going to take a white, and I'm going to zoom in right now. I'm just going to be filling in the insides of the eye. And there we have it. So I'm actually going to add a little bit more wrinkle towards the corners of the eye here, just to kind of show the age. Not too aged, but just kind of like the kind of stress that he has or something, like that kind of experience of a warrior. And I'm also going to add a little bit of darkness along the nose line here. I'm also going to add a bit of a tiny shadow underneath the eyelid here. And then I'm going to take my white gel pen and I'm going to add some highlights on top. So just kind of work it a little bit. If you will need to just work it on the side here. There. So here we have our highlights and we have the skin all pretty much done. I'm actually going to darken a little bit of the skin on the left side because I want the right side to be a little bit more lit. So I'm going to color a little bit underneath the nose, kind of make a little bit of form around the lips. There. I'm going to add a little bit of white towards the teeth. And I'm also going to add a little bit of thickness. So I'm going to add a little bit of my level 1 pen. I'm going to trace on top. I'm also going to darken his eyes. There. So that's pretty much it for the skin, because that's the only place where skin is there. It's only his face. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.